In the spring of 2023, while cleaning out his late mother's attic in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, 43-year-old Mark Ellis stumbled upon a dusty shoebox wedged behind an old suitcase. Inside, among yellowed postcards and faded Polaroids, was a single photograph that stopped him cold. It was dated July 1982, and it showed his father, young, smiling, standing in front of a roadside diner in Arizona. That wouldn't have meant much except for one thing. Mark had been told his father was overseas that entire summer on a business trip he never talked about. His dad, now 78 and retired, had always been a quiet man. Honest, hardworking, dependable. The kind who coached Little League, fixed squeaky doors, and never raised his voice. But now, with just one forgotten photo, Mark began to suspect there was a part of his father's life no one ever knew. Hit like, subscribe, and let's go. Mark Ellis had always lived a steady, predictable life. A high school history teacher and father of two, he took pride in his routines: morning coffee on the porch, weekend trips to the hardware store, Sunday dinners with his wife and kids. After his mother passed in late 2022, he spent the quiet months of winter sorting through her things, piece by piece, with the same methodical care he brought to everything. His father, Walter, had moved into assisted living a few years prior. Mark visited often, bringing old photo albums and asking gentle questions about the past, trying to preserve family stories for his own children. Walter always answered in broad strokes, skipping over details, especially anything before 1985. Mark chalked it up to aging memory, or maybe just the way men of that generation were. They didn't dwell on the past. But after that photo turned up, Mark couldn't stop wondering what else had been left out of the story. A few days after finding the photo, Mark sat alone at his kitchen table, turning it over in his hands. The back was marked in neat blue ink, July 82, Flagstaff. That alone was strange. His father had always claimed to be in Germany that summer, working on a short-term engineering contract. It was something Mark had never questioned until now. The image nagged at him. Why Arizona? Why lie? And who took the picture? Zooming in, Mark noticed something else: a woman in the background walking away. She seemed familiar, though he couldn't quite place her. The way Walter smiled, it was different too. Not his usual polite grin, but something warmer. That night, Mark searched through an old box of letters and travel receipts from that era. Nothing mentioned Arizona. No diner. No Flagstaff. For the first time in his life, Mark felt like there was something about his father he wasn't meant to know. Something he'd accidentally stepped into. Over the next week, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the photo was just the beginning. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, he returned to his mother's attic, this time searching with purpose. Behind a stack of old yearbooks, he found a thin folder labeled only with a single word: receipts. Inside were gas station stubs, a motel invoice from Gallup, New Mexico, dated July 12, 1982, and a small note written in a woman's handwriting: "Thanks for the ride. Stay safe. L." Mark stared at the note, heart pacing. His father had never mentioned passing through New Mexico. Who was Elle? Why had she thanked him? He told himself it could all be innocent, maybe just a stranger he'd helped. But the combination of the photo, the unknown location, and now this personal message didn't feel like a coincidence. Mark didn't bring it up to his father. Not yet. But the questions had taken root, and they were growing fast. Unable to ignore the growing unease, Mark decided to visit the assisted living center on a Wednesday afternoon, something he usually reserved for weekends. He brought the photo and the note tucked neatly into an envelope. Sitting across from his father in the quiet courtyard, he didn't show them. Instead, he asked casually, "Dad, have you ever been to Arizona?" Walter paused mid-sip of his tea. His expression didn't change much, but Mark noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. "Not that I recall," he said after a beat, looking off into the distance. That evening, still unsettled, Mark reached out to a friend from college who worked in public records. He gave her the names, dates, and locations from the receipts, asking for anything: traffic records, motel logs, anything. 2 days later, she called back with something unexpected: a police report filed in July 1982. A flat tire outside Flagstaff. The man listed? Walter Ellis. The person who filed it with him? Laura May Jensen. Mark had never heard that name in his life. The name Laura May Jensen echoed in Mark's mind for days. He searched through every family photo, every Christmas card, every document he had from the early 80s, nothing. No sign she'd ever existed in their world. Eventually, he searched her name online and found an obituary from 2006. She'd passed away in Phoenix, Arizona. The photo alongside it made Mark's stomach turn. She was the woman in the background of the diner photo, the one he thought looked familiar. The obituary listed no spouse, but one surviving child, Daniel Jensen, born December 1983. Mark did the math instinctively. He stared at the birth year. His father had been in Arizona in July 1982. The note, the smile, the silence. A cold wave of realization hit him. What if Daniel wasn't just some name? What if he was family? Mark wasn't angry, at least not yet, but he was shaken. The man he thought he knew might have lived a second life. A quiet, hidden life. And now Mark had to decide what to do with that truth. The weight of everything Mark had uncovered finally pressed him into a corner. He couldn't ignore it any longer. The quiet, reliable man who had raised him, who had been the steady foundation of his family, might have had a secret life that stretched across states, relationships, and nearly his entire adult existence. Mark found himself standing outside Daniel Jensen's apartment in Phoenix, staring at the address on his phone. His heart raced. What if he was right? What if Daniel was his half-brother, the result of a past Mark had never been told about? But what would he say? How could he confront his father with this information, especially now with Walter's health deteriorating? Mark didn't know if he was ready to face the consequences of his curiosity. His mind swirled with questions, guilt, and the fear of ruining everything. What would he find when he knocked on that door? And, more importantly, what would it mean for his family, his father? What would he do now? Mark knocked on Daniel Jensen's door late that afternoon, his heart pounding in his chest. When the door opened, a tall man in his early 40s stood before him. His face was a mirror of Mark's father, sharp eyes, the same jawline. But the stranger's expression was cautious, even guarded. "Can I help you?" Daniel's voice was steady, though his eyes betrayed uncertainty. Mark hesitated for a moment, then said the only thing he could think of, "I think we're family." He showed Daniel the photo, the note, the police report, and waited for the truth to spill out. The silence stretched, heavy. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice low and tight. "You're right. I'm your brother." Mark felt the ground shift beneath him. The world he knew seemed to crack open in an instant. But then, just as quickly, Daniel softened, stepping aside. "Come in. We need to talk." In that moment, Mark felt the smallest spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could begin to understand everything. Sitting across from Daniel in his modest living room, Mark felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. The conversation unfolded slowly, with Daniel revealing the truth bit by bit. Yes, Walter had been in Arizona in the summer of 1982, but it wasn't an affair, at least not in the way Mark had feared. Walter and Laura had been close friends from college. A brief but intense connection had led to a night in Flagstaff, one Mark's father had regretted and never spoken of again. Daniel was the result of that fleeting moment, a mistake but not an intentional betrayal. His mother had raised him alone, never contacting Walter, believing it was best to keep the past buried. Mark's heart lightened as Daniel shared his story, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the perfect ending, but it was real. He had found answers, and now he could move forward with a clearer understanding of his father, and perhaps a new relationship with his brother. Mark's life slowly began to settle back into its familiar rhythm, but with an added layer of complexity. He visited Daniel a few more times, their bond growing, though it was still fragile. Mark had learned to forgive his father, understanding now that some things were simply too painful to confront. Walter never acknowledged Daniel, and Mark knew he couldn't force the issue. But the truth had changed him. It had forced him to face the quiet corners of his family's past. As for his own family, Mark became more open with his kids about the importance of asking questions, of seeking truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The lesson wasn't lost on them, but he couldn't help but wonder, If you knew a secret could change everything, would you seek it out? Or would you leave it buried? To protect the life you've always known, what would you do? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.